Final Fantasy is a legendary 36-year-old franchise with easily over 50 games in total, and with sold copies totaling upwards of over 170 million. This JRPG series is one of mine and many others' favorites, and whether or not you like it, it has permeated our lives and culture for most of our lives. And like other franchises equally as gigantic such as Mario, it's hard not to see a specific kind of game pop up with the famous IP branding that's a bit of a head-scratcher. Well, Final Fantasy at this point might have had a few of those. But for this episode of Death of a Game, a series where we take a look at the largest contributing factors for a game's death and put that and the evidence gathered throughout the episode together for a final deduction at the end of the video. We're taking a look at Final Fantasy's incredibly interesting but perhaps not so expected or well-known Battle Royale title, Final Fantasy VII: The First Soldier, and trying to figure out what went wrong, as merely just 1 year after launch, the game was shut down at the beginning of 2023. Pick your class, detectives, in this Final Fantasy themed Battle Royale and get ready to find out why this totally unique mobile-only Battle Royale didn't survive past a year. Oh yeah, detectives, this video doesn't have any sponsors, so if you'd like to support me and Tom in continuing to make the Death of a Game series and more videos like this, please subscribe to us on YouTube memberships, or go to our Patreon page and subscribe there. On that note, I'd like to thank all of our current patrons, as well as YouTube memberships. Quite the list. And many of these are longtime supporters, so thank you again to all the patrons I just listed, and thank you to any new patrons or members that join after this video. Remember, Tom and I need to make a living, and ad revenue is pretty much always in flux, and since we don't like to chase trends and go after whatever is the most popular type of thing to cover, and to those who are wondering what you can do if you can't offer any monetary support, don't worry. Just keep watching the videos, just keep liking them, just keep sharing them. That's always helpful as well. Thank you to all for supporting the channel, and let's get back to the mystery. Final Fantasy is as ancient as gaming itself, but the story of Final Fantasy's Battle Royale is not that old, naturally, but even more so in the sense that it came at the tail end of the Battle Royale craze, where we saw titles like Fortnite, Apex, and PUBG reach heights never before seen. February 25th, 2021, we see Square Enix announce 2 new mobile titles. The first would be, well, The First Soldier, a Battle Royale game set in Midgar before the events of Final Fantasy VII, and then the other was Final Fantasy Ever Crisis, which was a chapter-structured single-player title that covers the entire line of the Final Fantasy VII timeline. The First Soldier takes place 30 years before Final Fantasy VII, when Shinra is forming Soldier, an experimental corps of enhanced fighters. It appears to feature gunplay, melee combat, and abilities, and players can switch between a third-person and even a first-person view. Final Fantasy VII: The First Soldier would feature classical Final Fantasy staples like summoning, classes, jobs, classic enemies, and of course, chocobos. The First Soldier had a teaser trailer also released with the news, as well as the announcement that the game would be playable on mobile iOS and Android. Now, the BR mobile market is certainly there. PUBG has an incredibly successful mobile game, and so does Call of Duty, but it's considerably smaller than the rest of the market on the other platform. Final Fantasy games had a reputation for being quite good looking and requiring kind of a powerful device, so promising mobile only at the start certainly seemed like it could introduce some problems. Besides the aforementioned, there's an issue of the audience in the first place. How many Final Fantasy fans were playing on mobile? And specifically, the kind who wanted to play a very active game like a Battle Royale. While we're speaking of audience, we have to get the elephant out of the room. Yes, this fast into the video. What was the audience for a Final Fantasy-based Battle Royale? Well, this was proving to be a, I guess we'll find out, kind of situation, because there just wasn't any signs or demand pointing to Final Fantasy fans wanting a Battle Royale. It seems like a desire for Final Fantasy to add yet another genre and game type to their ever-expanding catalog, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Plenty of big IP spin-off titles have plenty good reputations, as more than just random low-effort spin-offs. But would that be the case with The First Soldier? According to the next headline posted on IGN, it seems that Square Enix's approach was more so using The First Soldier, the Battle Royale, to bring Battle Royale fans into the Final Fantasy universe. Which doesn't sound like a bad idea inherently, other than, well, why would a Battle Royale fan necessarily play a mobile-only Final Fantasy-themed Battle Royale? Well, other than it just being kind of like a sleeper hit, right? More details were released February 25th, 2021 concerning the new Final Fantasy Battle Royale. Like the game would traditionally use, this game would also utilize the same job class system from traditional Final Fantasy. Tetsuya Nomura, whose name should be familiar as he was in charge of the Final Fantasy VII Remake project too, but that's kind of an oversimplification because Nomura has a giant resume, but he was the creative director and character designer on The First Soldier. Now, having no experience isn't the end of the world. Japan has actually shown a history of being able to tackle games they don't have a market understanding of, or even just a stable of those games, and do quite well. Speaking of Final Fantasy, this involves a process of serious research and immersion. Now, would The First Soldier have this same treatment though? Considering Nomura and team had quite the full plate even outside of the game's development, there were some serious doubts concerning that, I think. The development team pinned for the Final Fantasy Battle Royale is the long-tenured mobile gaming developer in Nagoya, Japan, A-Team or A-Team Entertainment, with multiple mobile games under their belt, though none particularly well known globally. Still, they were experienced developers, which would certainly benefit the development of The First Soldier. And being overseen by a veteran Final Fantasy developer and producer would also probably help matters tremendously. The launch date for Final Fantasy VII The First Soldier would be announced October 12th, 2021, set for the next month in November, with even more details also being declared, such as the upcoming playable game modes and class details. Those classes would feature iconic Final Fantasy jobs such as the Warrior, Sorcerer, the Monk, the Ranger, and the Ninja, each featuring job-specific abilities and quirks that most fans are familiar with, like ninjas being stealthers, and monks being CQC specialists, and sorcerers wielding spells, and so on and so forth. But if you're not familiar with them, the names are pretty intuitive. The playable modes would include a revamped tutorial, teaching new BR players how a BR properly works, and ranked matches and standard matches, which would also be possible. Paid cash shop microtransactions would be included in the game, naturally it being on mobile, but they would have no effect on gameplay. Matches would depend on the skill of players, said the producer Shoichi Ichikara. The third mode would be a mode that would tie into the story of Final Fantasy VII, but not actually contain the story itself, which seemed like quite a miss. Final Fantasy was the story even when you played tactics, and although Battle Royale seemed like they're inherently multiplayer focused, pretty much all of them have story. The First Soldier was certainly featured in the Final Fantasy VII world, which would help, but it lacked a proper tie-in for the story. I think the background makes sense though, with the whole virtual reality gimmick that everyone is familiar with the story of Final Fantasy VII, that's used by Shinra to train soldiers. You can then see the familiar locations during your attempt at being the last remaining soldier standing as well. But not actually having a story mode, despite having all of these nostalgia bits, or any progressive story, to me, if it was an attempt to introduce BR players to Final Fantasy, those players would be essentially enjoying a not very Final Fantasy experience, which was kind of a shame. Ichikara says that, well, it wouldn't be a Final Fantasy experience without leveling up and experience points, which I think is kind of ironic because I feel the same way about a Final Fantasy game without story. Ichikawa would state that 75% of the beta respondents said that the game was meeting their expectations, just needing more balance and shifting essentially. My issue with using this as a metric to define how well your game is doing is, for starters, only certain players play a beta, so that's a limited perspective already. Throw in the fact that the game was already rather niche and not exactly what most Final Fantasy fans were checking Square Enix for, well, you can see how judging the reception of your game, while important, can lead to making certain errors. You have to be careful that you take the lessons and information that you're getting and actually get the right lesson from it. Data is useless if you just can't properly use it. My point here really is this: how can Ichikara be sure that players at large like the game when a beta is incredibly insular? Especially when their entire objective is to obtain the large Battle Royale audience, which is not your audience. Okay, well, how helpful is your die-hard audience's perception for obtaining an entirely new audience? Not that helpful, really, right? Would the Final Fantasy fans who were playing The First Soldier be enough to fund the game's future development? If the entire audience meant to obtain was a foreign audience of another genre your giant IP hasn't touched yet? Final Fantasy VII The First Soldier would release November 17th, 2021 on Android and iOS mobile. With the rise of the mobile market and the popularity of the Battle Royale market and the success of games like PUBG on mobile, Final Fantasy VII The First Soldier was set to really make waves on mobile devices, especially because it was an incredibly advanced game for such a platform. Additional iconic Final Fantasy jobs would also be added, such as the Trickster and more later on. The aforementioned modes were present in the game, and the core of the game was the same: 75 players and be the last player standing. utilizing various weapons, materia, and jobs to assist in that endeavor. The new teased mode, Variant Mode, was an asymmetrical game mode where one team could take control of enemy mobs, such as legendary summons like Bahamut later on, and Sephiroth. As most battle royales at this point also featured, First Soldier would also feature a season pass, which would be its primary form of monetization. So sure, you could win skins and visual stuff in the game, but generally speaking it wasn't pay to win. With a fair business model, aka free with a battle pass, and boasting the strong Final Fantasy name, the First Soldier would reach 1 million downloads in just a few days. While in any case this is wildly impressive, like if my game got downloaded that many times, the question was going to be, could First Soldier maintain this level of success, as it was almost expected of such a high-profile mobile title. Some mobile titles were raking in hundreds of millions a month, with millions of players monthly rotating in and out. 1 million downloads for the First Soldier was a good start, but it wasn't nearly as impressive as you might think. Not according to the suits at SC. Within just a single month, there were serious reports of the matchmaking in First Soldier taking forever, which partly could be due to the game having 4 to 5 modes at launch, which I never thought I would find myself being critical of a game having too many modes at launch, especially these days, but here we are. It's a battle royale. But I actually discovered in my investigation that the largest reason for a slow matchmaking was just simply due to lack of players. But why? I haven't spoken about the game itself as much, but the First Soldier wasn't a bad game by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, from watching the gameplay so far, if that's your perspective, then you probably just hate mobile games. The First Soldier was a serious game, and was a serious mobile game especially, which sort of leads into my next point. Why was First Soldier such a serious title, and only released on mobile devices? Immediately, they double alienated their audience. Their pre-existing massive audience, I might add, by first making it mobile only, so PC and console players can't play the game if they don't play mobile, and second by making the game incredibly high fidelity. In 2021, although most people, especially in the first and second world countries, have smartphones, the type of phone required to play a game like the First Soldier wasn't just a basic smartphone. It was something more akin to a mid-tier smartphone. This, just like with PCs and their specifications, immediately alienates a large portion of your possible gaming audience. In an online game where 75 players are required in a lobby, that's problematic. Less players playing Final Fantasy VII, the First Soldier, because their phones weren't good enough and it wasn't on PC, contributing to the longer matchmaking times. A-Team Entertainment's response to such was kind of, at this point, the typical playbook for any battle royale, the introduction of bots. Instead of allowing players to just sit in queues endlessly or for very long periods of time, they would utilize the bots to streamline the matchmaking process. This, much like when this was prevalent in Spellbreak, another BR I covered in this series, was incredibly criticized by the player base. Bots in a battle royale, or really any shooter, are controversial, but there's a lot of misunderstanding about bots. Players don't actually mind bots, generally speaking, when a bot functions properly, as shown to be possible in different battle royales and shooters. In these games, players can't tell from a distance if the player or bot is a player or bot. So there's enough plausible deniability in some games, something the First Soldier was just lacking by comparison, sadly. The other issue with bots is once they outnumber the player base, that plausible deniability sort of disappears. Now you just know the game is full of bots and nobody wants to play a BR match with mostly bots. So as a developer, it's a difficult balance, but if you mess it up, it's only going to get worse from there on as the player base continues to shrink and bots become more and more prevalent. The First Soldier would have its Season 2 complete with a new battle pass and content February 28th, 2022. The Dragoon class was added and probably played some of the most unique in the First Soldier as well. A new boss and summon, Bahamut, new materia, teleport, private matches, and a login daily bonus. The update was pretty damn good, especially for the game only being a few months old. Private matches would help facilitate possible private game scenes in the competitive scene, and daily bonuses, which were rather standard in the industry, would potentially motivate players to connect more daily. If A-Team was able to consistently update the game like this, they would at the very least impress their dedicated audience and keep them motivated to keep playing the game. There were still questions though on FS's ability to attract other players, however. Season 3 would come in June of 2022, and would feature a new map, a new weapon, and a new class, Machinist, as well as more gadgets that could allow you to fly around like a hoverboard and a mechanical chocobo. Because we don't have population data, it's rather hard to know where the player base was for the First Soldier. While it was certainly there, it didn't seem to have grown exponentially since launch. This meant that although the new updates would be successful with the players already playing the game, they would do very little to attract new players. According to some data mined from some mobile devices, Final Fantasy VII, The First Soldier would peak at 2 million downloads, just double what they had a few days after launch, a year later, and peak at 3.2 million in revenue. These numbers were incredibly low when compared to competitors within the Japanese realm, such as Fire Emblem or even stablemate Final Fantasy Brave Exvius, another full-blown gacha game, or well, just any serious competitor. Games like Candy Crush and Pokemon Go are pulling in 1 billion over a year for reference. So although it was sad that it was made public October 2022, the writing was all but on the wall for Final Fantasy The First Soldier. The shutdown will be announced for January 11th, 2023, with no possibility of keeping the servers alive. Square Enix would state that it feels that it hadn't delivered on the experience that it aimed for, so they would begin winding down service. And that was pretty much the only reason listed for why, which felt a bit disheartening because Square could have offered way more but just chose not to. I mean, they were pretty forthcoming in the past with Final Fantasy XIV, right? Later on, according to the creative director Tetsuya Nomura, a large reason the game didn't succeed was because the game was initially targeted at PC and consoles, but those plans never came to be. I think this is actually a good point and not some kind of cop-out answer, because as he discusses further in the article, the fan base for Final Fantasy was very much a PC and console audience. They were left in the dark effectively. There's not a whole lot of focus from the developers on the game design itself, and to be honest, I kind of think that that's fair. I don't think that The First Soldier is a flawed game from a design perspective. I think it's flawed because it has a complicated control scheme in a competitive, fast-paced game released to a Final Fantasy audience for the first time on mobile only. Final Fantasy was known as a franchise for wowing in the gameplay and graphics department, and launching a BR on mobile devices might accomplish some of that due to the limited audience, due to technical limitations, but they would have definitely accomplished more of it on more platforms. It just felt like so many cool parts of the game got kind of overshadowed by that. Though I guess there's some solace to hear the devs talk about that, and how it was essentially the initial plan. There's also an argument to make that perhaps going to PC and then consoles first, then mobile, like most BRs did, well, that would have been the better approach too. But I digress. Okay, I'm sorry about that, detectives. I always get carried away when the mystery music starts playing. That means it's final deduction time. It was a mobile-only Final Fantasy Battle Royale. Poor optimization on mobile devices. A questionable business strategy. A lack of demand. A small player base full of bots. While some might wonder why I even covered this game in the first place, on the count of it being mobile only and, well, just being a Final Fantasy Battle Royale, but I stand by the fact that The First Soldier wasn't even a bad game. But it was another story added to the overall tale of the series, and yet again the narrative that even if you make a good game, that's sometimes not enough to find success. Especially with such a big IP and large expectations, right? Square Enix will likely attempt more mobile titles, as despite the failure of FS, they have had some success there. But will they ever attempt another Battle Royale, let alone on mobile? That's doubtful. Thanks for watching.